Right, so hello everyone. Have to wait a few minutes for all these streaming services to, well, get themselves sorted out. So, today we are continuing with our pumpkin bike that we're making for IMVU. This is a furniture item. So today what we're going to do is add at least one avatar pose. So what we've got to do for that is set the object up as a furniture item, and then what we've got to do is add the seating nodes that are needed for seating or avatar spots or avatar poses so that we can actually add one, because without it we don't get anything. So what we've got to do first then is set up the object as a furniture item. So we started the project with, let's just open another instance of Blender. So we started the project using the furniture file, which is, so these are the starter files that are available from, where are they? From here. And in terms of Blender, you ought to be making sure that you are using Blender 2.83 LTS, because that's the one that is fixed now. It's not going to be updated with any features. So if you use the latest version, which is Blender 2.90, you may find that there are issues exporting or working with it with IMVU, because it is constantly being updated. So it'll be updated and some features might break or something else might happen. And hang on, I'm going to cough. Sorry about that. So it may be updated and not work as well as expected. So wherever possible, download Blender 2.83 LTS. The link for that is so blender.org download, and then we want, there's the link. Right, so the link for that is blender.org/download/LTS. Copy that, drop into chat. You should be using that for all your IMVU content. So we started the project with the furniture file, and this contains everything that we need for furniture. So we've got the basics. We've got a seat, a sitting avatar, so there's a set of nodes for a seated avatar and a set of nodes for a standing avatar. So when the object is used in IMVU, depending on which set we use, we'll have a sitting or standing avatar. So for this we're going to use the seated set, and then we've also got our furniture components. Let's just hide those. So we've got a set of components that are for ceiling. So we've got a root node and the default cube, which just is a placeholder. We've got the wall node, and then we've got the floor node, which is the one that we used. And we're going to use the components that were actually included with the furniture file. So we need to use this node. Let's just hide the mesh. Where's the mesh? So we're going to use that. That's the node that IMVU uses to latch on to objects. Well, when objects are used in a furniture room, that's what's latching on to the furniture nodes in the room. And all furniture has to have one of these. So with our project, we've actually still got, let's just hide that. We've actually still got, oh, did we hide it? I think we hid it. Yes, we hid it. So we've still got our furniture node in place. So what we have to do is associate, let's just hide all these objects. Where is that? So that's a sphere, so we can use the outliner for this. Or you can just press the H key, H for Harry, and it'll just hide them. Oh, also, let me just hide all of these then. Is that one? No. Where's that one then? Oh, it's there. So offline, this is the texture that we had before. So this is what we did before. Yes, one in the last video. So the textures for that, UV layout. Let's go full screen. That will be that one, stalk and pumpkin. So we had a very simple, essentially just a color. In exporting the texture maps, what we can do with those is use them to just paint some very basic highlights and tints that emphasize the shape of the mesh. So this was exported as the current texture that's being used. Which is what we ended up with, replacing the originals. So we made a duplicate set of materials. So the original ones are now .001.001, so they are duplicates, and we renamed the duplicates to our actual textures. So we essentially just swapped the materials. But in doing this, what we can do is keep two sets of materials, and each set has a different texture associated with it. So we can see the difference. So selecting this one, and it's that one. So that's applied to the mesh. Select the handlebars, and that is that one. So we've used the wireframes just to highlight just some edges, just to give us a bit more shape and detail. So that was just done off screen because it can take a bit of time to paint out the textures. Right, so let's just hide that. Actually, what we can do, double click the name, sphere, double click, we can call this pumpkin.mesh. Double click sphere. Don't have to do this, it's optional. What we want to do here is create a vertex group or modify any existing group so that we link the object with the root node. And we can generally test whether there's a connection or not by selecting the root node, pressing the G key and moving it. If the mesh and root node were connected, the root node would control the mesh, and we'll see that in a second. So select the mesh, edit mode, select all, and then we want to be in object data properties. So we've got our selection vertex groups in place. So we were using these as an augmentation to our selection based on materials. So we can set up some temporary vertex groups and it'll allow us to select and deselect sections of the mesh. But for IMVU we can't use these. So we need to create a new one, plus click that, create a new group, double click, just call this root. Select all, and then assign, and then test. What we can do, just to make sure we don't confuse these vertex groups, is just rename them. Push root up to the top of the stack. So this is our stack. So we've got 3. We can use these buttons, change the order. So that's at the top of the stack. Exit edit mode. Whoops. Back into object mode. What we can do now is select our object, then shift click the skeleton or the root node. And because we're using nodes, we have to use parent, because ordinarily if this were a clothing item or an accessory, we could use an armature modifier. But for furniture that uses nodes, that's these things, we have to parent the objects together directly. So click the mesh, shift click the root node, and then it's object, parent, object, object, parent, object. We'll get this little pop-up down at the bottom here, and we want to make sure that the type is set to object and that keep transform is active. So click on that, select from the list, keep transform. So what this now means that if we select the root node, press the G key, our pumpkin moves with it. So the two are now parented together. So for the seating, so that's the basic furniture item setup. So we could export this. In fact, let's try that. So let's just save this. Save as 7. So let's do a test export. Select the mesh, then the node, file, export, FBX. We'll get the file browser window thingamajig with our settings and properties on the right hand side. So we only want these particular objects, so selected objects. Everything else is okay. Geometry, those settings are alright. Armature, always disable add leaf bones. We don't need any animation, so we can disable bake animation. Check the file name and the file location, that's okay. And then export. So, IMVU. So we want to be in create mode, as always, create. Derive new product. Furniture and rooms, or rooms and furniture. And we want furniture. This will give us a standard chair. Go. So we're going to replace all of that, well, the chair, and these two materials. So what we want to do is import the FBX. So FBX import, load FBX, browse to where is it? Furniture. Pumpkin Bike 7, there it is. Because it's a furniture item, it'll load it directly into the importer. Sometimes we get a pop-up, the select skeleton root dialog, but with furniture it just loads it directly into the importer. So apply scale 0.01. Disable rename room nodes. We want to change the mesh ID. That should be 0 because we want it to replace the chair. It's brought in our materials. There's no animation, so we can import. It's given us some warnings about overriding materials, which we do want to see. So click import changes. Apply changes, and there is our pumpkin. So all we need to do now is add our seat node, not seat, yeah, seating and the pose. So that worked. Right, so the seating. We've got the basic furniture set up. So we want to unhide the sitting node. So when you are manipulating the seating or the seat nodes, always grab hold of the large seat node and move that using the widgets. Everything is basically set up so that you don't have to do anything else other than just position the group based on the location of that big node. So we did that in the last video, just so that we could get a sense of the size of the pumpkin and the position of the handlebars. So we just move the seat node into place, just like that. And that gives us an approximate position of where we want the avatar to be located. And that's moved everything. So we've got a handle, catcher, picture, seat node, and obviously the avatar dummy that represents the avatar. Now to get this working, we need to select the nodes, click, shift click, shift click, shift click, and then we want to shift click last the root node. So that will highlight a brighter orange. And then we parent these. So object, parent, object. So we're going through the same process again. Essentially, we're linking everything together to create a hierarchy. Object. And this, hopefully, this is why we need to set keep transform. So if you watch these two nodes in particular, these two tend to go out of sync. This is why we need keep transform, because it'll use their active locations, which is what we want, as opposed to potentially their original position before they were manipulated. So this is why we always use keep transform. And again, object. So what we should have now, if we click the root node, press the G key, the whole lot moves. So we can test this. Let's double check. So we've renamed. So we're in object properties. Mesh is renamed. That's root. That's seat01.sitting. Capture 01.sitting. Picture 01. And then handle 01. So we should be able to export this and do another test. So select everything. Let's save this actually before we do. Save number 8. Root node selected last, so shift click that last. Export FBX. This is number 8. Change the file name. So same settings, selected objects. Everything else is okay. Geometry, that's all right. Armature. Add leaf bones is still disabled, so double check that anyway. Bake animations, that's fine. Export. So we can test this in IMVU. Create. Derive new product. Rooms and furniture. Furniture. Go. So again, replace the chair. So FBX import, load FBX. We want magic pumpkin bike. There it is, number 8. Load straight in. 0.01. Apply scale. Disable that. Rename room nodes. Mesh ID 0. Materials are okay. Import. Get the same warnings. Import changes. Apply changes, and there is our pumpkin, and it now has a seat. So that's just using the default. So what we want to do, where is that? Just double check something. Get off my pumpkin. That handle is off kilter for some reason. Unless the furniture item is rotated slightly. Very weird. So that's the default seat node. So we now have something that we can work with to create our pose. So for this, number 8, that's okay. So for this, we're going to, let's use that other, we're going to drop, don't save, we're going to drop the alternative pose file into this version of Blender or this instance. So, female poses. So this is the, is that on that page? Yes, it is. So you can download these on the page that's linked in chat. Let's drop that in again. And that is the alternative pose file. So this is what we'll use to create the pose for the pumpkin. What we want to do here is append. We obviously need to bring in the pumpkin components, or some of them. We need the pumpkin at least, so that we can see what we're doing relative to it. So we have to append that into the pose file. So File, Append, and then browse to the furniture file. Lots of projects. Where's the pumpkin? There's the pumpkin. So this is number 8. So for append, blend files, that's the file that Blender saves, they act in a sense like archive files, like zip files or RAR files. So we can double click and drill down into the contents of the project. And when we're appending, most of the time, especially for IMVU, what we want is the object folder or the contents of the object folder. So click on that, double click, and then we need to find our elements. So there's the pumpkin. We need the root node. So shift click or control click. And then we want seat 01 sitting. So control click. So we need those 3 items at a minimum. And then all we do is just click append. And there they are in the not the furniture file, in the pose file. So what we want to do with these, we have to set the scene relative to the pose, which is rooted or positioned at 0, 0. So it's 0, 0, 0 actually, but so what we want to do here is align the seat node, because this is the object IMVU actually uses to position the avatar in IMVU. So although the root node furniture item is positioned at grid 0, 0, 0, that basically means that the object will lock onto and locate on the furniture nodes in a room. Seat node can be positioned anywhere relative to the furniture's root node. So when we're making a pose, what we want to be doing is making the pose relative to the avatar's root, which is seat 01.sitting, not the furniture's root, which is actually called root. So what we have to do in the pose file is reposition our objects so that sitting, seat.seat01.sitting is positioned so its origin point, that's that little dot that's highlighted by the widget. So this little dot is the origin point of the node. That has to be positioned at 0, 0, 0, or approximately positioned there. And once that's done, we can start on a pose. So let's just save this so we have something to go back to. Save as. This is number 9. Right, so a pose. So poses aren't particularly difficult to do per se, because all we're doing is selecting individual bones and rotating them or positioning them depending on the bone. And we're in local axes or local orientation. And what that means is that the bone's rotation, so if we look at the widget and its current orientation for spine 04, so it's aligned so that the x-axis in this particular instance follows the orientation of the bone. If we switch that to local, not local, global, the widget reorientates itself. So you can toggle between the two depending on how you want to position the bone or rotate the bone. So what we're going to do is just create a simple pose. So we're going to grab some bones and move them. Let's just grab the thigh bones and the hip bones a little. And we've got the starter file is set up so that whenever you pose a bone, whenever you move one, it automatically inserts a keyframe, which are these yellow dots, into the timeline of the action editor. And what it's going to do is override or overwrite the example T-pose action that's in place. There are a couple of them, just for the sake of there being examples. So we've got T-pose set by default, and all that's going to do is just override the pose data that was originally included. So what we can do is grab these bones, rotate them, so we're selecting individual bones, rotating, I wonder, let's do something slightly let's do this instead. I was going to do just an ordinary sitting pose, but the shape of the pumpkin means that we might be able to do something like that. So it's nothing particularly complicated. The poses don't need to be. So we're selecting the bones and we're using the colored loops of the widget. So we've got red, blue and green. They correspond to the cardinal orientation of the bone. So we can select each one and left click drag. You have to be quite precise. Left click drag on the actual loop itself. To get our bone positioned. So this is a little, it's a bit more time consuming than fiddly. Right, so that's the legs. So for the arms, and what we can do also is if we want to manipulate something on multiple axes at the same time, when you move the mouse over the widget, it highlights a paler color. And if you left click, when it does that, it'll manipulate the bone on multiple axes, which is useful for certain bones. So we can do that in combination. So we need to get this arm up and on the handlebars, or the twiggy bits. So that's one. And this can be a little tricky because the orientation of the widget is not aligned or axial to the pose that we're trying to create. So you are sometimes rotating around the axes that you actually want. So maybe a bit more foot, a bit more. That's a bit too much. So this is where creating poses is tricky. Well, it's not actually creating, it's the manipulation of the skeleton which is tricky. So we're trying to align the hand to the handlebar. Now, because of the way that the skeleton is rigged, we can't just move the hand. Well, we actually want it to move backwards a little bit because we want the handlebar to rest approximately here with the hand. But in order to do that, we can't just move the hand. We have to play with the bone chain. So we've got the shoulder, down the bicep to the elbow, and then across the two wrist bones, so there's a split there, to the actual wrist joint, and then to the hand. So in order to move the hand, we have to go right to the back of the, not the back, the top of the chain, and move that shoulder bone in order to then move the entire chain all the way down so that it moves the hand. Which then means we have to compensate by doing minor adjustments to some of the other bones, the elbow in particular. Because what we can then do wrist bone, rotate that a little bit. Same on the other side. Because what we can then do is a little tricky. Let's just quickly hide the skeleton so we can see the pose that we've got. So that's the pose we've got at the moment. So what we want to do is just maybe wrap the fingers around. We don't need to, but so select the finger bones. Thumb bone. Let's take a look at that. So hide the skeleton again. That's better. Do the same on the other side. Thumb bone. Whoops. Skeleton. That's a little bit wide for the thumb bone. So we don't want to get too close because we need to make allowance for different avatar shapes. So when people are using scalers and whatnot, that a little bit closer, and that one a little bit closer. So if a bone is moving too quickly when you manipulate it, what you can do is hold the shift key down and it'll slow that right down. Just helps with being able to better control the manipulation of the bone. So there we go, there is our motorbike pose. Or pumpkin motorbike. Let's move that a little bit forward. We want to be careful about avoiding clipping. Right, so that's our wonky handlebar pose. So let's just save this. File, save as. So it's 10. So that is the pose. So this is what we're going to now prep for IMVU. So for static poses, we can't just export this one, what is called a keyframe. So this is a keyframe. So this one set that goes all the way down. So each bone has a positional marker, which is what these dots actually is. It's just a marker in the timeline that indicates that there is some pose information, some coordinates, rotation and location coordinates for that particular bone marked in the timeline. For static poses in IMVU, we can't just use this one keyframe. We have to create, well, we have to prep the timeline for IMVU. Otherwise, if we export this, it's either FBX, the FBX file, or IMVU will interpret this as there being nothing going on in the file. So we have to prep the file so that IMVU interprets some motion or movement, so that there's some data there, so that it picks up on that. So what we have to do with that is select all. So we're selecting all the bones of the armature. Make sure one of them is selected as the active object, which can be a bit tricky sometimes because it should highlight a slightly brighter red outline if we're using the alternative starter file. We want to then pose, copy pose, copy. So we're at frame 1, we've selected all the bones, we've made sure one of them is highlighted as the active bone, then gone to pose, copy pose. What we want to do is move the timeline slider, so left click drag to frame 5. It doesn't have to be frame 5, but frame 5, and we want pose, paste pose. And that'll drop the entire pose data that's associated with the avatar or the armature into that keyframe. So we now have a duration set of 5 frames. So once that's done, move to frame 10. What we want to do here is pose, clear transform, all. So pose, clear transform, all, and that resets the avatar. And again, because we've got the keyframes being automatically inserted, it's created a third keyframe. So now we have a sequence that has 3 keyframes in it. So one at frame 1, one at frame 5, and another at frame 10. But crucially for IMVU, there's the tween, or the change between frame 5 and frame 10. And just this movement indicates to IMVU that there is some data that needs to be looked at in the file. And this is how we have to prep static poses. We don't need to do this for animated poses because obviously the animation between keyframes is essentially this. It's just frame 5 to frame 10 but extended however long your animation sequence is. But for static poses we have to do this. So let's just save that. Whoops, save as 11. And then we can export this. So we can do that by just selecting a bone or all the bones doesn't really matter. File, export, FBX, selected objects, everything else is okay. Geometry, that's all right. Armature again. Whoops. Add leaf bones, disable. And we do want animation this time, so leave bake animation active. Expand the options, so click on the little arrow thing, and we want to disable NLA strips and force start end keying. And what this does is it forces the FBX to export. So if we had a project with a number of poses in the same file, what we want is the FBX to include each of those sequences as a separate track, in essence, within the FBX file. So disable those two, NLA strips and the other one that's now hidden by the tooltip. There we go. File name, that's okay, and then export. So hopefully we should now be able to let's create a new version. So derive new product, rooms and furniture, furniture, go. So let's import the furniture parts first. So FBX import, load FBX, and we want pumpkin 8. So this is the part that has apply scale 0.01 that has the seat node. Disable rename room nodes. Mesh ID is 0. That's okay. The materials import. Import changes, apply changes. So there is our default. So what we want to do now is import the pose FBX. So import FBX, load FBX, pumpkin 11. So we'll get this warning. Depending on how you import your action or animation pose, your animation or pose, you may get this warning. FBX file contains no meshes. If that happens, that's fine, because we don't actually need the meshes. So we don't actually need the avatar parts. We just need the skeleton and the action that's associated with it. So import changes, and it drops it straight into the importer. And we've got, it's kept the apply scale because obviously we just imported a previous FBX. So it's got the action sequences that are included in the pose file. So T-pose, that's the one that we actually edited. So it's brought that in, 9 frames, that's good. The other ones are just the examples, the other examples. We can leave those, or if you don't want them, just click the checkboxes just to disable. Then click import, success, import changes, apply changes. So that, because we've brought in another skeleton, has reset the furniture item. So we have to go into config, and we want root node %2f root.xsf. Select, apply changes, and there's our seat node back. So set up the pose. We need to be in actions, add. So we can use stance.idle for this. I think it's, is it room or avatar? I can't remember. Let's do room first. Big same ensemble. Select T-pose. That's the skeleton that we were using. Loops 0 to loop infinitely, so it'll keep playing the frame range that we're about to set. It'll play it infinitely. So loop start frame 1, loop end frame 2. So we want to set a frame range. Basically it's just a single frame that just loops infinitely. So composition, replace, and we should be able to apply changes. Whoops. So it's avatar. Apply change. Where's our pose gone? There is something that we have to do. Let's just save this, save as, because sometimes this works and sometimes it doesn't. Because what you can do, let me see if I've got another project that I can load in. Let's try the magic book. Actions. Sometimes you can get away with, so because we've created a custom pose for the furniture item, because we've only created one pose, you can sometimes get away with the trigger being stance.idle because there is only the one pose. There's nothing conflicting with it, so IMVU will automatically assign that pose as the default pose that's played when the item is being used. So as soon as the avatar sits in the seat, it'll trigger the idle pose of that single seat and play the animation or the pose. Whoops. Ordinarily, what you have to do is rename the seat pose that we've got, where is it? In the furniture file, because we've created a custom pose. So it's a bit tricky because it's an either or. It's one of those, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Because you can use the default trigger and the default seat node name, which is seat 01 sitting, and it'll work. Other times it won't. If that happens, what we have to do is just rename the seat node. So seat 01, we can either do that in object properties, so in the input field, or we can do it in the outliner. Just double click, doesn't matter which one. But we want to get rid of the append sitting and rename that something unique. So let's just call this pumpkin 01. And then we'll have to re-export this furniture item. Let's just double check that everything is linked up still, and it is. So seat 01, pumpkin 01. So select all the parts, root node last, double check. Let's just save this just before we do. So this is now number 12. Yes, number 12. So I have to export this again because we've made a change to the project. Export FBX. Selected objects again. Everything else is okay in this section. Geometry, that's all right. armature again. Disable add leaf bones. We don't need any animation, so we disable that. Let's double check that we've got the right name, location, export FBX. So let's do another version. Derive new product, rooms and furniture, furniture. Go. So let's set up the furniture first. Number 12. 0.01. Disable mesh ID 0. Import. Change. So there's our pumpkin with the seat. Oh, and the node's in the right place this time. Or is it? Tries weird. Pose files, so load FBX. Number 11, that's the pose. Yeah, that's okay. Import 0.01. Let's just get rid of those because we don't need them. Import. Import, apply changes, and of course that's reset. So we've lost the seating. So config, reset the furniture item. So there is our seat node back. We want actions, add. So this will be stance.pumpkin01. Avatar, same ensemble, T-pose, loops 0, and our frame range 1 to 2. And replace, apply. Ooh, and the pose has gone all wonky. Avatar, apply change. So this may be one of those instances where, so let's save this, save as pumpkin 12. So this may be one of those instances where we have to close all the windows and create mode, then reopen pumpkin bike 12. It's not doing it. Most odd, but it's auto assembled our project, so we've got the textures in place on the mesh. So let's do a bit of troubleshooting. So let's get rid of the loop start and end, see what that does. Ow. 1, 2. Apply changes. So this may be that it hasn't so select all, make sure one of the bones is selected, and we'll have to hard insert pose animation insert keyframe. Lock rot location rotation. So we're on frame 1. Do the same thing again. Animation insert keyframe. Lock rot. So that means, so what we've got, yeah, so what we have to do here, so this sometimes happens. When we see these orange bars, that indicates that the two frames are identical. When we don't see them, it's saying that there's a difference between the two. For the reset pose or the reset transition, that's not too much of an issue. But for the actual pose frames, all of these should have the orange bar indicating that they're identical frames. So what can happen here is that some of these bones that have no orange bar, so if we click on the little triangle things to expand the options or the data that's associated with each of these, we'll see that they've got some extra data points. Scale. We can't use scale in IMVU. So if we remove these, we select them. So you can either do shift click, well no, it's shift click. Shift click to select them, and then just press the delete key just to get rid of them. If we close that bone back now, we can now see that the orange bar indicating that the two keyframes are the same is now there. So we have to do this for each of the bones that has one of these. So we can see here the missing data because we have no, that's the one we just did. Which one did we just... Yeah, scale. Can't use scale. So delete. Close that back up. So unfortunately, we have to do that for each of the bones that's missing that orange bar. And sadly, there isn't a quick way of doing this. So expand all of these. And we want to select all the scale parts. For all the bones that have gone wonky. So that's those ones. Delete. Close them back up, and we then see that they're all the same. Left wrist. It can be a bit tricky to see because of the colours, but the colours help us identify which part of the armature is being inspected. But it's the scale values that we're removing. And unfortunately, once the scale values are in place, you can't just select the bone and try and pose in the location rotation. If the scale data is there, it's difficult to get rid of it without having to actually manually edit the values or just basically deleting the keyframe outright, or the pose. So our pose is captured in the keyframes of this. So we'd have to delete all the frames, well, all the bone captures within the frame in order to get this to work. So it's, do you want to delete and repose a skeleton, or just work your way through these individual bones and clean them up? And this, incidentally, if you're using Blender, which I'm assuming you are, this is one of the reasons why the fingers go wonky. It's because the scale data is being kept in the pose file. Makes the fingers go all wonky. So if you disable, not disable, if you delete the scale values, you should find that the fingers straighten themselves out properly and pose as you expected them to. Oh, almost there. And we generally don't modify Z head or female O3 master root. So we can now see, whoops, oh, we've missed one. That all the the keyframes are identical. And it's like I say, it doesn't matter for the reset because we're not actually using those. Let's just double check the other ones as well. In fact, what we can do is expand channels. So we expand them all. Just remove all the scale values. Again, it can be tricky to see. Oof. Probably easier just to expand. So it's channel, expand channels. Just to expose all of them and then just go down the list. So we did those, so delete, whoops, oh. Then we can collapse. Whoops. Why are those down there? Right, so let's just save this. Save as. Because we don't want to do that again. What number is this? 13. 13. And then re-export. So select all the skeleton. Again, make sure one of the bones is the active bone. File, export, FBX. It's number 13. So again, selected objects. Whoops. That's all right. Geometry, that's all right. That's all right. Bake animation, again, disable NLA strips before start end keying. So hopefully this will work. 13. Let's do a clean file. Rooms and furniture, furniture. Whoops. Let's import. So that was the pose. Let's import the pose first. No meshes, that's fine. 0.01. Disable, don't need those. Import. Add the furniture item, which is number 12. (0.01) mesh ID 0, materials, import. Apply changes. So there's a default. So hopefully this will work. So stance dot pumpkin01 avatar, same ensemble, T-pose, loops 0, loop start frame 1. Well, actually, let's not just do that yet. Replace, and then just apply changes and see what happens. There we go. So 1 and 2. So there is our motorbike pose, and that finger's gone a bit wonky again. I have to look at that. So that is our pumpkin motorbike. Well, magic pumpkin witch's bike thing. So yes, if you get that, you'll need to go back into the Blender pose file and double check that none of the bones have any scale values associated with them. They should only really have rotation and location. And it then means manually selecting and deleting the scale values. But that is our project completed. So that's our motorbike, Halloween pumpkin motorbike. Obviously, if you wanted to add more poses, you'd need to add more pose spots or more furniture spots to the item, depending on so you'd position them. So let's say we wanted to use this. What we could do is literally put this here, link all of these nodes. Whoops, it's not those two, it's that. Which set is it? Oh, it's that one at the front. So we could literally have that there, select the nodes, parent them. So the important part really for this is that the handle nodes aren't all in the same place. we want to make sure that they're easily selectable and highlightable, if that's a word. So we select the nodes, parent them to the root node, make sure that the seat nodes, because these might be both custom poses, are appropriately named. So seat 01, pumpkin 01, and we can stick with seat 02, and then that would be pumpkin 02. And then what we would do is import this seat node, root node, first seat node, and the mesh. We'd append those into the pose file, and then just position the group relative to the avatar's origin point, which is that dot. So we align each of the seat nodes and its origin to the origin of the avatar. So with the second seat node, what we'd have to do, so that's the origin, we'd have to move the entire group so that that origin is sat over the origin of the avatar skeleton. And you would do that for as many seat nodes as your object had. So depending on how many poses you wanted the item to have, you'd have to just keep adjusting the seat nodes for each pose, and that just ensures that you are lining up your poses correctly. And then obviously just select the skeleton and then export, and it'll export all the poses that it finds in the file. And then of course when you import it, you can make this selection when you import it in the importer. When it appears down here, the animations, you just click the tick box or the check box of the one that you want and clear the ones that you don't want, and it'll bring just those in. So that is our first Halloween item. And here endeth the video. So, thanks for lurking, lurkers. Spooky lurkers. And we shall see you on the next one. I'm not quite sure what we'll do for that. Might do something a bit more a simpler item, so just an accessory item or something more that's simpler. But do the usual thing. So follow, subscribe. Follow, subscribe. Click the buttons and the bells and the whistles and the whatsits, and we shall see you on the next video. So bye for now for this first Creatween 2020.